Thank you so much for coming. Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I could probably just yell, but anyway. Thank you very much for coming. You know, it's interesting that we heard in the preamble that this group is not about hating anyone or about bigotry or any of these things, and it's unfortunate that that kind of thing is necessary, but anybody who has been to more than one ACTS meeting knows full well why it is necessary. But I'm here to tell you, very happy to tell you, that it's all over now. It's okay now to oppose Sharia. I want to thank Jay Leno for being here, and Michelle Obama, and Jay Stent. Where is Jay? Actually, you may have heard that Jay Leno indeed has been leading protests against the Beverly Hills Hotel for having the unfortunate misfortune of being owned by the Sultan of Brunei, who has just imposed the fullness of Sharia in Brunei, the fullness of Islamic law. That is the institutionalized oppression of women, the institutionalized oppression of gays, non-Muslims, and the denial of the freedom of speech and the denial of the freedom of conscience. And suddenly we discover that Hollywood is a hotbed of Islamophobia. And Jay Leno and Ellen DeGeneres and several others, all these Hollywood literati were out in front of the Beverly Hills Hotel protesting against this horrible imposition of a law that nobody has ever seen in the world before or ever heard of. It's never been imposed anywhere else. And it's absolutely egregious that it should have been imposed in Brunei now. And because the Beverly Hills Hotel is owned by the Sultan, therefore it has to be the epicenter of anti-Sharia protests. And so I thought surely Jay would be here, because after all, we've been on this for years. And where has Jay been? Maybe the First Lady will formulate a new hashtag to set it all up for us and put it in context. We also see that it's now even possible to be opposed to Sharia in the White House, in the Barack Obama White House, with the president's wife holding the famous hashtag "Bring Back Our Girls," which we know, of course, the Islamic jihadists of Boko Haram will immediately see that on their Twitter feeds and be embarrassed at how they have offended one of the nation's most prominent human rights activists, and will therefore free the girls and get gainful employ, and everything will be okay. Now, the funny thing is, of course, that Michelle Obama never did and never would explain what exactly the abduction of the schoolgirls has to do with Islamic law and why it's connected to Jay Leno's protests against the Beverly Hills Hotel, and she may not even know. But in fact, as many of you no doubt know, Boko Haram, the group that abducted the schoolgirls in Nigeria, is acting according to basic teachings of the Quran, the Holy Book of Islam, and Islamic law. It is perfectly permissible within Islamic law to kidnap people. In chapter 47, verse 4 of the Quran, the chapter entitled Muhammad, it says, "When you meet the unbelievers, strike at their necks." And then you have four choices. You take hostages, and you can enslave them, you can kill them, you can free them outright, or free them for ransom. And this is laid out in this verse, chapter 47, verse 4, and becomes the basis for that. Four different choices you can make for what you do with the people you have kidnapped, non-believers. Probably Michelle Obama does not know, when she holds her famous hashtag "Bring Back Our Girls," that 90% of the girls in question are Christians, and that they were forcibly converted to Islam. With the Abu Bakr Shakal, the head of Boko Haram, saying that he would free the girls who refused to convert to Islam if the Nigerian government freed various prisoners, various jihadi prisoners. So in other words, he's acting strictly in accord with Islamic law and strictly in accord with the Quran. He's taking hostages who are non-believers. he is either enslaving them, which is perfectly permissible, according to chapter 47, verse 4, or freeing them for ransom, which is also perfectly permissible, in accord with chapter 47, verse 4. Not only that, but the Quran also says in chapter 4, verse 3 and chapter 4, verse 24, that a man can have up to 4 wives, as long as he treats them equitably, so it's okay, you see. And the captives of his right hand. The captives of his right hand, if you read the commentaries on Islamic law, are infidel women who have been captured, who have been kidnapped, and who are pressed into slavery, specifically sex slavery. And now you think, no, wait a minute, Spencer, this is just lurid, this is unbelievable, this is a little bit salacious. Surely this can't be so. This is a great world religion. I read about it in my 9th grade book. And great world religions don't have sex slaves. Well, with one exception. It is in the Quran, and therefore there is no appealing against it, and there is no reforming it or changing it. It was perfectly well understood in Muhammad's time, according to the traditions about what Muhammad said and did. There was a time, for example, there's a hadith, a story of Muhammad, in which the Muslim warriors come up to him in battle and they say, we have captured these women, and we want to sleep with them. And we just don't know if it's okay to practice various forms of prevention of birth. I'm trying to be delicate here. And Muhammad gives his permission, in short. But in other words, the issue in question was about the contraception. It was not actually about whether they could kidnap and sleep with infidel women. That was taken for granted as being perfectly okay. And it is part of the purported revelations that he received from Allah. Now, that means that it's just as much part of Islamic law as what the Sultan of Brunei is doing. And so now it's suddenly fashionable. It's okay to oppose Sharia. The thing is, I would doubt that if anybody actually asked Jay Leno that what the relationship is between Sharia and Islam, if he would know, or if he even knows that Sharia has anything to do with Islam at all. He probably thinks that it's a twisted, hijacked version of Islam that's practiced by extremists. And this is not just because Jay Leno might not be as well informed as he should be, or as knowledgeable as he should be. I don't know the man. He may be sharp as a tack. The question is, though, how is he going to be able to counteract the fact that he and the rest of us have been lied to by government, by law enforcement, and by media in an absolutely thoroughgoing and consistent fashion for 12 years now and more about this threat? And the lies continue. For example, I'm just saying that Michelle Obama probably has no idea that this has anything to do with Islamic law, and that's also because nobody's telling her. Not only does after every jihad attack and every jihad action in the world, does her husband and other leaders in the Western world, not only do they all stand up and say, well, you know this has nothing to do with Islam, but also the media does the same thing. Just over the last few days in Jihad Watch, I've responded to 2 articles, one at CNN and one at the Huffington Post, by Muslim leaders saying this has nothing to do with Islam. What Boko Haram has done is absolutely contrary to the tenets of the Quran. Now, there's a funny thing about those articles. In the first place, did you know that the name of Boko Haram is not really Boko Haram? Boko Haram means Western education is sin. And the idea behind that, usually when that is explained in the mainstream media, it's explained in terms of, and they're sort of like Luddites with AK-47s. They don't like modern technology except for the guns. And so they don't like going to school, they don't like that book learning. But actually, Western education is sin refers to the fact that they object to any education that's not based on the Quran and Islam. That's their problem with Western education. They're perfectly fine with modern technology, especially the weapons. But there's more. Boko Haram, that's not really their name, that's their nickname. That's what they're popularly known as. Their real name is the Party of the People of the Sunnah for Dawah and Jihad. The Party of the People of the Sunnah for Dawah and Jihad. Sunnah is accepted Islamic practice, the Islamic laws that are extrapolated from the Quran and Hadith. Dawah is Islamic proselytizing. So you have a group that is officially and avowedly and solely and wholly Islamic in its motivations. But these two articles, the one in CNN and the one in the Huffington Post, neither one of them actually dealt with the justifications for taking infidel women, kidnapping them, and making them into sex slaves that are in the Quran that I just outlined. Both of them purported to make a case that this had nothing to do with Islam, and that this was completely in violation of the Quran. But neither one of them actually mentioned the verses about taking captives of the right hand, or the verses about kidnapping and either enslaving or ransoming or killing or whatever. Neither of them even mentioned it. Now you see, that's the difference between reform and deception. It's very important that we all grasp the difference between reform and deception. If I were a Muslim and I were writing about the Quran and I were a Muslim reformer and I objected to what Boko Haram had done, then let me ask you this. Do you think this is reasonable? I would write and I would say, the Quran says that a man can have up to 4 wives and take captives of his right hand, which was understood in the time of Muhammad according to the stories attributed to him, and in Islamic law as meaning that a man can take sex slaves from infidel women. But this practice is in violation of human rights and human dignity, and therefore must be rejected. And we have to formulate new understandings of these verses and reject their literal meaning, and work against the Muslims who take them seriously in the modern age. That would be what reform would look like. Have you ever seen it? Me either. What we see instead are all these people saying, like Arslan Iftikhar at CNN, who used to be an official of the Hamas-linked Council on American Islamic Relations, and an Ahmadi Muslim in Baltimore who wrote in the Huffington Post. They both just ignored these passages of the Quran altogether. And they quoted some others about showing mercy and being compassionate, and quoting the passage from chapter 81 of the Quran about how the girl child who was buried alive will ask for what, on Judgment Day, for what reason was she killed? Well, that's nice, you know. I'm glad that's in there. But these girls aren't being buried alive. These girls are not, that verse simply doesn't apply to what their situation is. And so, if they don't mention the reasons that Boko Haram uses to justify their actions on Islamic grounds, then they are not going to convince Boko Haram or any other Muslim who agrees with them that what they're doing is wrong on Islamic grounds. What they're really trying to do is lull the infidels into complacency so that we don't get too exercised about this happening, and that we certainly don't do anything to call upon Muslim communities in Nigeria or in the West or anywhere else to work to reform and to end this practice and to teach against these beliefs so that this kind of thing doesn't happen again. And that's the problem. It's amazing to me, but it's not amazing to me because I'm so used to it. But it's still, it ought to be offensive to us. It ought to be amazing to us that we have to start this meeting with assurances that we're not racist and bigoted. It was not racist and bigoted to oppose the Nazis, and it's not racist and bigoted to oppose groups like Boko Haram. As a matter of fact, it's really an amazing thing that people would even think that it is racist to defend Nigerian Christians who were being terrorized by Boko Haram, Nigerian schoolgirls who were being captured by them, Nigerians of all creeds and perspectives who are terrorized by this group. That's racism, to support the victims. You see how Orwellian this is. And yet, in Boston, when a couple of white guys set off a bomb at the Boston Marathon in the name of jihad and Islam for the same goals and the same motives and the same understanding as the Boko Haram group has, then it's racist to be upset about that. And so, this race thing is getting me very confused. I don't understand it. Ibrahim Hooper of the Council on American Islamic Relations is blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and I'm brown-eyed and swarthy. And if I oppose Ibrahim Hooper, I'm a racist. Ibrahim Hooper goes on television, goes on Megyn Kelly, and trashes Ayaan Hirsi Ali because she's racist. Now, wait a minute. But what we see here, of course, is a consistent campaign that is designed to discredit any resistance to jihad terror. And they do it to everyone. Every time, and I mean without any exception, every time anyone says anything that is opposed to jihad terror or to Islamic law in its oppressive aspects, or to Islamic supremacism in any way, then they are tarred and demonized, vilified, smeared with the intention of being marginalized altogether so that the jihad can advance unimpeded and unopposed. And people of goodwill will be afraid to speak out about it. Now, think about this. This is an extraordinary thing. This is an amazing thing that they've done to us. And it's really astonishing how well it's worked. Look here, I was told here before, this is a very good crowd for your group, and we have filled the room. And a couple hundred people here maybe, or 150, I don't know what the capacity is, but it's a nice crowd, and I thank you all for coming. But think about how many other people, if they heard about it, would have thought, and certainly did think, oh wow, that racist bigot is here in town. Isn't it terrible? And some people are going to go see him, and they'll throw red meat to the Yahoo rednecks. And imagine, in 1942, if there had been a meeting about the motives and goals of the Nazis, and people had stayed away saying, oh, that would be hateful and bigoted to go to that. And the idea that they have so ingrained in the American consciousness and in the consciousness of the West at this point, that to oppose people who are on record openly saying they want to destroy us is hateful. The idea that anybody would have taken it seriously for a second is astonishing. But it's worked very well. I mean, why don't we have 1,000 people here, 2,000? And it's not just about me. I need to hear anyone who would speak about these things. Most people have no idea, right? You know, your friends, your family, your coworkers, no idea about this. And if you talk about it, they'll say, oh, you're going on about that again. You know, he's a little nutty about this issue. Stay away from that. Right? Has this ever happened?
Exactly.
So, let me show you how well it's worked. Fort Dix. We all know about the Fort Hood jihad shooting, but there was a plot a few years before that at Fort Dix. And at Fort Dix, it was also a racist thing. It was a bunch of white guys from Albania. And they were Muslims, and they were going to go into Fort Dix and shoot as many American soldiers as possible in the name of jihad and Islam before they themselves would be killed, and then they would go to paradise with the virgins, as per the Quran, chapter 9, verse 111, paradise being guaranteed to those who kill and are killed for Allah. So, this never happened. Why didn't it happen? They got caught. How'd they get caught? By our wonderful law enforcement apparatus? No. I'm going to get to them later. They got caught because of a kid, 17-year-old kid, Brian Morgenstern, in a video store. He worked at a video store. And one of the jihadis came in with VHS tapes because what they liked to do for fun was make some popcorn and grab some non-alcoholic beer and watch the jihad videos. Beheadings, bombings, gory stuff. Allahu Akbar, the whole deal. And they liked this stuff because that's the kind of people that they were. And so, the problem is they had it on VHS tapes. So they took it to the video store and they asked Brian, can you transfer this to DVD for us?
Oh, jeez.
And so he's doing his job, and it's rolling by on the screen, apparently, as he's transferring, and he's appalled by what he sees. He's shocked to his core by all this blood and gore that he's seeing there, and the glorification of it, the obvious joy that is being transmitted from the screen for this blood and death, as the jihadis always remind us that they love death. And they say, we will win because we love death more than you love life. I ain't so sure. But anyway, that's what they say. Now, Brian, 17 years old, doesn't know anything, working in, no offense to 17-year-olds, working in a video store, goes to his boss, and he says, dude, you know, and I'm seeing some really weird stuff, he didn't say stuff, on these videos. Should I go to the police, or would that be racist? I kid you not. Now, why would a guy think for a minute that it might be racist to report people for what they apparently might have been planning in terms of committing the same murder and mayhem that he was seeing on the screen in the United States? Well, obviously because he's breathed that in the culture. That is part of our understanding of what it means to resist jihad. It means that you hate whole groups of people just because of their skin color or their national origin or whatever. It doesn't mean you hate being blown up. It doesn't mean you hate the idea of kidnapping little schoolgirls and making them into sex slaves. It doesn't mean that you hate the idea that anybody who criticizes a particular belief system has to live under death threats for the rest of his life. No, it doesn't mean any of that. It means you're racist. And it worked. It worked. Such that even groups like you, where you were on the front lines, and you were determined and willing and ready to fight for freedom, and you got to start out on a defensive mode and say, well, you know, we're not here to hate anybody. Well, that ought to go without saying. And I'm not criticizing, don't get me wrong. I think I thank God for groups like this and for all of you being here. I understand why it is that that has to be said. And I have defended myself 1,000 times against the same kinds of charges. But I'm just trying to help you understand it as a tactic. That it has made people afraid to resist jihad and to stand with us tonight. And that was the point of it all along. It was always a cynical and self-serving attempt to shut down any criticism of jihad terror. Now the thing about it is that even that being said, it wouldn't have mattered. And we wouldn't have to be on the defensive, ever. And it wouldn't have made any difference if it had just been groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations with its ties to Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood and other groups like that. If it had just been them saying it, well, that would have been easy. We would have said, well, look, yeah, they're Hamas. Of course they're going to say that. The problem is that it was picked up by the mainstream media such that there is no honest reporting, none of this by mainstream media reports. You can just be sure that if there is a story about jihad terror in CNN or MSNBC or the New York Times or the Washington Post, it's not going to be fair to those who are resisting jihad terror. You can just be sure, 100% sure of that. When I see a reporter from the New York Times emailing me or calling me, or the Washington Post, or CNN, or any of them, I just know, okay, yes, Mr. Prosecutor, how are you going to try to catch me out today? How are you going to try to make me say something that you think you can use to discredit this movement? Because that's what they're all about. Now, why are they all about that? I wish I knew. Are they bought? Are they stupid? Are they bought and stupid? I don't know. Are they so determined to hate the United States and hate Judeo-Christian civilization that they ally with its avowed enemies? I think that has a lot to do with it. But anyway, even worse than that is that the U.S. government signed on to it. Now this was a gradual thing, but it's been coming for a long time. The U.S. government signed on to it starting right after 9/11, really, when George W. Bush went into the mosque in Washington. And behind him were standing Nihal Awad, who is the co-founder and still the executive director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, a group with demonstrable ties that had been affirmed by the Justice Department with Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. Also there, as I recall, was Abdurrahman al-Amoudi, who's now in prison for funding al-Qaeda. They were the leading moderates that he could get to stand with him in Washington. And he said, of course, as we all know, he said, Islam is a religion of peace. And, you know, at first it seemed like, I remember thinking, and a lot of people I know, probably many of you thought at the time, he doesn't really need it. He knows better. But he has to say that. It's politics, that's all. Right? Except then he just kept acting as if it were true. More and more and more. So I used to be a trainer, as was noted in the introduction. I used to train the FBI and the CIA. I wasn't supposed to say the CIA, but I figure all bets are off now. I was at the CIA, ladies and gentlemen. That's quite a place too. You go in there, you know, you have to practically strip to your shorts just to get in the building. And then you go in and, you know, it's funny because everywhere else, when you go to the FBI or to a military group, there are usually people, they're all sitting around a table and they all have name plates in front of them. You know, John Smith and Tom Jones, not the singer, and various others. And in the CIA, though, it's all Fred, Joe, Bill, Tom. I think, why do you even have the name plates at all? You know? Just call yourself number 1 and number 2 and number 3. But anyway, or 86 and 99. But anyway, in those places, I used to tell people about Islam and jihad. I bring the Quran and teach them about Islam and what Islam teaches in its various sects and schools about warfare against unbelievers and subjugation of unbelievers and so on. The things, in other words, that make jihad terrorists fight us. The teachings that they believe in. Because obviously you cannot defeat an enemy that you can't understand. That is one of the oldest tenets of warfare. You have to know your enemy. And so that's what I used to do. Many times when I went into those places, they would tell me not to talk about it. And I didn't. I don't mean not to talk about the subject matter. I did in the talks, but they would say, don't say you've been here. And that always nettled me, you know? Because it was, don't say you've been here, because CARE will make a fuss about it. And I used to say, I remember one time, and this is when it all started to blow up. Really, in a certain sense, I shot myself in the foot. But I don't really regret doing so. This is how it happened. In 2010, one of the last times, if not the last time, that I ever did this kind of training. I did it for about 5 years. Off and on, you know, every few weeks, every few months. Anyway, I was at a military base in Louisville, Kentucky. And the colonel, the head of the base, he brought me in to his office before I gave the talks. And he said, we're very happy that you're here. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And please don't tell anyone you were here. And I said, sir, with respect, I have to tell you, I object to the idea that we're letting a group with ties to Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood tell us who the military can and cannot listen to. That would be like saying, well, we can bring in a guy in 1942 to tell us about what Mein Kampf is all about and what the Nazis believe, as long as we bring in a Nazi the next week to tell us that it was all wrong and it's really a belief system of peace. It would be just as absurd. So we agreed to disagree, but there were a couple of lower level officers, actually the ones who were responsible for bringing me there. And they agreed with me that we should not kowtow to this or acquiesce to this. And so they agreed to pose for a picture with me, which I put up at my website, Jihad Watch. And sure enough, days later, the Council on American Islamic Relations put out a press release saying Spencer spoke at this military base in Louisville and spread Islamophobic hate and so on. And we demand that he be dismissed as a trainer for the military. And they found out that I had spoken to the FBI and to Joint Terrorism Task Forces and so on. And they started this huge drive. I was amazed. They got Jesse Jackson to, I kid you not, to tell Robert Mueller, who was then the head of the FBI, that he ought to get rid of me. Oh wow, Jesse Jackson's hurting me. That's kind of... But anyway, it worked. They started to expand the effort. They named other trainers. It culminated on October 19th, 2011. This took quite some time and built in force. But on October 19th, 2011, 57 Muslim organizations and allied organizations wrote to John Brennan, who was then Homeland Security Advisor, and is now, of course, the head of the CIA. And they told Brennan that Spencer had spoken in Louisville at the military base, and that this was terrible, and other Islamophobic trainers had spoken here and there, and that there were materials at FBI offices and so on, like my books, The Truth About Muhammad and The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam, and other books that were Islamophobic and hateful, and that this was terrible. They didn't actually say any of the information in them were false. They pointed out some things, like, for example, there was some PowerPoint presentation by someone, not me, that said some signs of radicalization are when secular Muslims suddenly grow long beards and wear kaftans and start going to mosque regularly and carrying around a Quran all the time. And they said, how dare this? This is terrible Islamophobia. But actually, that's just true. Mike Hawash, you know, Maher Hawash was a Muslim in Portland, Oregon, who worked for Intel, the computer group, and he was very well regarded in the community. He was a pillar of the community, involved in all sorts of community activities and so on. Very secular Muslim. No beard, ordinary Western dress, no sign that he was involved in, and didn't go to mosque, none of that. Then all that changed. For whatever reason, in his life, some crisis in his life, some trigger in his personality, he grew his beard, he started wearing Muslim dress, he started going to the mosque all the time. Then he served 7 years in prison for recruiting for Al-Qaeda. These were signs that something was up with Mike Hawash. And so it was perfectly legitimate to say that in the training materials. But it was just offered as evidence of the horrible Islamophobia of these training materials. Brennan got this letter, wrote back almost immediately, and as if to emphasize how seriously the Obama administration took this, he wrote back on White House stationery. Now you understand, the president lives in the White House. Usually if you get a letter and it says White House, Washington, D.C., it's from Barack Obama. For John Brennan to write on White House stationery means Barack Obama is behind this 100%. And, because you know, he has his own, we pay so much money in taxes. They all have their own little stationery, their own letter. Every one of them. They don't have to share. So anyway, he wrote back to Farhana Khera, who was the head of Muslim Advocates, which is a Muslim lawyers group tied to the Muslim Brotherhood, of course. And she had been the one who had written the letter that was co-signed by the 57 organizations. And he said how seriously they took this. They were going to immediately comply. They were going to remove all the trainers who were Islamophobic. They were going to scrub all the counter-terror training materials of any mention of Islam and jihad in connection with terrorism. Because as we all know, it's a religion of peace, and as Brennan himself has said, jihad is a noble concept involving spiritual struggle. And so we don't need to be talking about jihad in connection with terrorism. Actually, after all, who ever heard of jihad being connected to terrorism? It's absurd. And so, he not only said that, but he said, we're not only going to scrub all this material, we're going to re-educate any agent who was taught by these Islamophobic trainers or by this Islamophobic material. Re-educate. Chairman Mao was very pleased, I'm sure. Anyway, this was in 2011, remember. Now, as you all know, the Boston Marathon bombing was on April 15th, 2013. And it was done by Tamerlan and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, who were Muslims from the Caucasus. And they did it, according to Dzhokhar, the surviving brother, to defend Islam. And that Tamerlan Tsarnaev had actually followed that path of radicalization that the FBI now dismisses as Islamophobic to look into. He had been a very secular Muslim who had been wearing Western dress and was clean-shaven and never went to the mosque. And then suddenly, for whatever reason, whatever complex of reasons in his life, he changed, he grew his beard, he began going to mosque, he affected Muslim dress, he started telling everybody that they ought to be reading the Quran and cutting out the various things they were doing that were against Islamic law. And as we know, he blew up the Boston Marathon, killing 3 people and wounding over 260, maiming some for life. Now, that was April 15th, 2013. But in 2011, right around the same time that John Brennan was assuring these Muslim groups that there would be no mention of Islam in connection with terrorism in any counter-terror training materials, the Russian government contacted the FBI and they said, there's this fellow you should know about, Tamerlan Tsarnaev. He is, and I quote, this is what they said, he is a follower of radical Islam and a strong believer who's tried to join underground groups in Dagestan. Dagestan is in the Caucasus. The only underground groups in Dagestan are jihad terror groups. Al-Qaeda is very active there. So if Tamerlan Tsarnaev is a follower of radical Islam and a strong believer who tried to join underground groups in Dagestan, then he was a jihad terrorist. If I had been asked, and of course I wasn't, if I had been asked in 2011 what they should do with that information, I would say, watch that guy like a hawk. Don't let him out of your sight. Keep him under surveillance and make sure that he is not getting involved in jihad terror activity. The FBI did not do that. They made a perfunctory investigation and they dropped it. And on September 11th, 2011, the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 jihad attack in New York and Washington, Tamerlan Tsarnaev went to see 3 of his friends, or as close as he had to friends, in Boston, who he had boxed with and had other interaction with. They went to the same gym and so on. And they were his friends. And they were Jews. And he slit their throats and murdered all 3 of them. He was not caught. It was never connected that he was involved. It was only after he blew up the marathon that it came out from one of his friends in Florida who was being questioned about his knowledge of the Boston Marathon jihad plot. And he spilled the beans that Tamerlan had killed those 3 guys.
Jeez.
Now what if the FBI had had him under surveillance at that time? Maybe those guys would be alive today. Or if they had to be killed, which God forbid, but you know, if they were going to be killed and the FBI couldn't prevent that, then at least they would have known, well, wait a minute, these guys happen to be, all 3 of them, friends with the man the Russian government told us is a follower of radical Islam who tried to join underground groups in Dagestan. And you know, Islamic jihadis don't like Jews.
Really?
And so maybe we should call in Tamerlan Tsarnaev for some questioning about these murders, and maybe if they had, then he would never have been around to blow up the marathon. He would be in prison today. Now why didn't they do that? Well, there's several reasons. In the first place, they have no idea, I'm sure, that Islamic jihadis don't like Jews. They don't. Why? Because that's in the Quran. Chapter 5, verse 82 says that the worst enemies of the Muslims are the Jews. But they're not allowed to read the Quran. They're not allowed to know anything about jihad doctrine. That's Islamophobic. They got rid of all that right around the same time the Russians told them that this guy was a jihadi. And so see, you have two choices. If you're the agent who gets that memo from the Russians, maybe you're part of the new regime, and you've been trained by the John Brennan people. And so you know that jihad is an interior spiritual struggle for bettering one's life. It has nothing to do with violence. Only greasy Islamophobes think it has anything to do with violence. And so you hear that Tamerlan Tsarnaev is a jihadi, and you think, oh, nice. Or you're one of the old regime. Maybe you heard me speak. Maybe you heard somebody else speak who said the same kinds of things. But you know that Washington doesn't want to hear this. That at the highest levels in the White House, they don't want to talk about Islam in connection with terrorism. And so the Russians told us he was a follower of radical Islam. Well, so what? We know that doesn't have anything to do with terrorism. And so they would have been maybe too prudent to speak out. They didn't want to be charged with Islamophobia in the FBI, maybe lose their promotion, lose their position, get reprimanded. So they let him go. No problem. Until Boston Marathon happened. It's the same thing with Fort Hood. You recall that on November 4th, 2009, Major Nidal Malik Hassan, an army psychiatrist, murdered 13 people at Fort Hood while screaming Allahu Akbar after he had passed out Qurans that morning to passers-by and told his neighbor that he was on his way to do a great work for God. Which is, of course, what we know that all people who perpetrate workplace violence do. Now, Major Hassan, same thing. Remember Brian Morgenstern, the kid in the video store? And he was afraid that maybe to report those guys would be racist? Well, I didn't tell you, he did actually report them. He decided to go ahead and be a racist, bigoted Islamophobe. And he reported them, and the plot was foiled. At Fort Hood, the same thing could have happened and should have happened, but it did not happen. And it did not happen because of this regime of pretending that there is no jihad threat and that Islam is a religion of peace. This is what happened. Major Hassan got glowing performance evaluations from his superiors. I have them in the book. They say, for example, that he could teach American soldiers a lot about Islam. And he did, didn't he? But not in the way they expected. And not in the way that they're even willing to learn now. That is, maybe not the rank and file, but certainly the superiors. They said that even though they knew, when they were saying it, that Major Hassan had been in touch with Anwar al-Awlaki and had been emailing him regularly, asking him about points of Islamic doctrine and about the parameters of jihad. Anwar al-Awlaki, the jihad terror mastermind. Anwar al-Awlaki, who was the imam of the Dar al-Hijra Mosque in Northern Virginia, and two of the 9/11 hijackers went there. Anwar al-Awlaki, who was involved in the plotting of the underwear bomber, the Detroit kid who hid the bombs in his underwear and tried to blow up a plane over Detroit on Christmas Day a few years back. Anwar al-Awlaki, who was involved in other jihad terror plotting in the United States. And they knew that Hassan was in touch with him. They also knew that Hassan, when he was supposed to be giving a lecture about psychiatry, Army psychiatrists, I don't know if this is true in other fields, but they have this thing, grand rounds, where they teach each other. And all the psychiatrists get together and one of them gives a lecture about the latest discoveries or whatever. The new way of madness or whatever. And Hassan's turn came to give his, and he talked all about jihad and about how it was the responsibility of the Muslims to wage war against and subjugate the infidels, and that the infidels would be punished in this life by that jihad, and then the next life having molten lead poured down their throats and so on. That's in the Quran. And some of his co-workers, some of his colleagues were terrified. And they were talking amongst themselves. It only came out afterward. But they were talking amongst themselves saying, we think this guy could go jihad himself sometime. And they were frightened If anybody should have known that, it was his superiors. There was an FBI agent who was monitoring Nidal Malik Hassan's communications with al-Awlaki, and he kept sending them up to higher-ups in the FBI in Washington. And they kept coming back saying, not a product of interest. That is, we don't care. And this happened 4, 5, 6 times. Always, not a product of interest, not a product of interest, not a product of interest. So finally, he contacted one of them, and he said, how could this not be a product of interest? Al-Awlaki is always plotting jihad mass murder of Americans. Here's this guy in constant contact with him. How could this not be something you care about? And you know what they said? They said, do you know that we can't monitor every Muslim soldier who goes to terrorist websites? We can't. They do. And besides, this is sensitive politically. Why? It's sensitive politically because they wanted Muslim soldiers. They wanted a Muslim army major. They wanted to show they weren't racist, bigoted, and Islamophobic, because CAIR kept telling them that the war on terror is a war on Islam. And so they had to prove, see, it's not a war on Islam. Look, we have this wonderful Major Hassan that we love. Promote him. If they had done otherwise, you can imagine immediately what would have happened. If they had said, well, you know, Major Hassan, we have to bring him in for questioning. We have to ask him about what he's doing, talking to al-Awlaki, what his plans are, what he thinks about jihad, what he thinks about terrorism. Imagine what would have happened if they had done that. You know, you could just see it on CNN, you know, and tonight's guest is Ibrahim Hooper to talk about Islamophobia in the military. And the horrible racism that Muslim soldiers are subjected to simply for expressing their faith. And there would be task forces. I'm sure, you know, Barack Obama would say, we can't tolerate this. Let me be clear. We're not going to accept any Islamophobia in the U.S. military. And he would appoint some task force to root it all out. And you know that the career that would have been ruined would not have been Nidal Malik Hassan's. It would have been that of his superior who reported him. And they didn't take the risk. You know, I mean, who of us would? It's a hard thing to say, well, I can commit career suicide now to try to head off a jihad attack, or maybe I can just let it go and hope for the best. I can understand why they did it. But still, 13 people are dead. And then General Casey, the Army Chief of Staff, said, it would be even worse than the attack, even worse than the murder of 13 people, if our diversity in the military were to suffer. In other words, we're keeping Muslim soldiers. We're going to keep on doing the same thing. We're going to keep on bringing these guys in who might hate us and want to kill us and just hope for the best because we want to keep up this appearance. And this is the situation that we're in because of this large-scale effort to discredit any resistance to jihad terror as bigotry and hatred and racism. This is the reason why the jihadis are advancing aggressively and confidently all around the world today. The jihadis' best friend in the United States are these groups that have like CAIR, chiefly CAIR, but not solely CAIR, that have so successfully planted it in the public mind and even in the government and the media that to resist jihad terror, to oppose jihad terror, is wrong. That it's better to get blown up, it's better to get killed than to do anything about it. Case in point, you know, a lot of people are just hearing about Boko Haram for the first time this week. I know probably most of you or all of you have heard of Boko Haram for years. And I've been on Boko Haram for years, I can tell you that. If you go to my website, Jihad Watch, jihadwatch.org on your dial, if you go there and you search for Boko Haram, you will find, I believe it's 115,000 hits. That is, I've mentioned Boko Haram, I've reported on their activities 115,000 times over the last 11 years. If you go to the website of the Council on American Islamic Relations and you search for Boko Haram, there is one response, one result. That is, they never have talked about Boko Haram. In other words, this is the situation. The only people who were standing up for the victims of Boko Haram were the racists. The only people who were speaking out against this violence and oppression and almost daily slaughter were the bigoted Islamophobes.
Yeah.
And so, once you discredit all the bigoted Islamophobes, there is no one left to speak out. And that's what they want. See, the Council on American Islamic Relations issues periodic reports on Islamophobia. And they're all about, you know, me and Pamela Geller and Noni Darwish and Wafa Sultan and all these people who are terrible, bigoted, racist Islamophobes. Now, what was interesting was, in the last report, they said there is legitimate criticism of Islam and jihad. But these people are out of bounds. And you see, that's a very potent thing to say. That's a very effective thing to say. It's very clever. You gotta hand it to them. These guys are very slick. It's very clever because they're saying that we're not against anti-terror efforts. We're not against even criticism of Islam. We're only against these people. It's just these people are crazy. These people are racist bigots. These people are ignorant, frothing hate mongers. The only thing is that they never name the other ones. They never name the reasonable ones. They never name the good ones. There really isn't any. It's just a trick. It's just a sleight of hand. They want you to think that they think there's reasonable criticism of Islam, but they don't identify any reasonable critics of Islam, because actually any critic of jihad terror, in any way, shape, or form, no matter how mild, is a racist, bigoted Islamophobe. Every last one. They don't want to have a legitimate discussion. They don't want to have a legitimate debate. They don't want to have a give and take of ideas. They want to shut down any criticism of jihad terror so that there's only jihad terror, with not a peep anybody daring to say against it. And so that's the situation that we're in. That's the state of the world today. What are we going to do about it? Well, obviously the only thing we can do about it is to stand up courageously, no matter what the cost, and no matter what it takes, and no matter how they ruin our reputations. You know, I can tell you, I admit, I cringe. You know, people, the other day, I was, where was I? Oh, I was at the computer store. I was having trouble with my computer, and you know, these kids today, they know all about that stuff. And so I went into the computer store, and the guy started asking me as he's fixing my computer what I did. And I said, well, you know, I'm a writer. And, well, what do you write about? Well, I write about terrorism. And he says, oh, really? Well, I'm very interested in that. What kind of things do you write? Well, I write about Islamic doctrine and jihad. Oh, well, that's fascinating. Have you written any books? Well, yeah, a few. And anyway, so I finally, you know, I show him the Amazon author page and the whole deal. And the thing is, I realize, you know, I'm cringing. And I'm ashamed. I'm not ashamed of my work. I'm very proud of my work. And I stand by everything that I've said. I have no regrets. But the thing is that I knew that once I left the store, he was going to do a Google search. And he would see, oh, I thought this was a reasonably good guy. He's a racist, bigoted Islamophobe. Oh, I didn't realize this. Look, he murders cats. This is what they have done. But we have to be willing to stand up to it. We have to be willing to take it. And at a certain point, it will reach critical mass. Jay Leno is actually a case in point. Jay Leno doesn't know Islamophobia from Shinola. He is a comedian. He's a talk show host. But he doesn't like the idea that gays don't have equal rights in Brunei. He doesn't have any idea what that has to do with Islam. But by golly, he's standing up, so more power to it. And see, this is the thing. They have the government. They have the media. They have the educational system. They have the entertainment industry. The only thing we have is the truth. And so we'll win. Because the truth cannot possibly be defeated. The truth can be obscured. The truth can be shunted aside, but it just keeps coming back. For example, and I'll close with this, the Grand Mufti of the Caucasus several weeks ago complained that in the US there was so much Islamophobia that there were actually people who link Islam with terrorism. And you know, folks, he meant us. He didn't mean Tamerlan Tsarnaev. He didn't mean Nidal Malik Hassan. He meant us. But the thing is that that's not just ludicrous to us. It's ludicrous to everyone. Everyone knows that it's the Islamic jihadis who link Islam with terrorism. It's not us. They try to pretend that we're doing it and that what they do really has nothing to do with Islam. They just happen to be Muslims who happens to do some act of violence for some other reason altogether, even though they're quoting Quran and everything to justify it. The truth will out. And at this point, that is our greatest hope. The situation is bleak. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. The situation right now is dire. But remember Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Russian freedom fighter. And he wrote about that living in a totalitarian system was like living underneath the sidewalk as the concrete's being poured. And the concrete goes over your head. And you are obliterated. You cannot breathe. You cannot see. There is nothing. But then the blades of grass poke through the concrete and break it. And that's the truth coming out. The truth is out. It is known. We have allies we don't expect, like Jay Leno. I'm sorry he couldn't make it tonight, but I have every confidence. We'll see him later. And we'll see many more others as well, because the blades of grass are going to keep breaking through the concrete. And so never give up hope. The truth will win. Thank you. Thank you very much. You're very kind. If you now have questions, comments, please keep your comments to a minimum and your questions to a maximum. Agreements, disagreements, death follows, whatever. I'll be glad to come to your talk if you have a long thing to give, but not right now. Anyway, you're going to do it with the microphone?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, sir.
How do you explain that there are 6 Muslim Brotherhood people infiltrating the federal government in the White, and that Obama has invited into the White House to infiltrate our security systems, our planning systems, the FBI and the CIA, and how do you explain that?
I'm not sure I understand the question. The question is, how do I explain the Muslim Brotherhood infiltrators in the FBI and the CIA and so on in the Obama administration? Well, I think it's inexplicable, really. I mean, it's a shameful thing that's happened. What is even more inexplicable is that no one seems to care. And when Congresswoman Bachmann called for an investigation, she was roundly denounced as a racist, bigoted Islamophobe. Problems with what?
The microphone.
Is it really?
Now it's
Can you hear me now?
It's very, yeah.
Yikes, you're right. Hello.
Oh, yes. Good evening.
So it's okay?
Okay, so I'll have to hold it here. Yes. Not unusual. Anyway.
The Muslim Brotherhood in the White House, there is a very important point about that. Bachmann was denounced at Sagonigan, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. Hello?
Yeah.
Bachmann was... Somebody doesn't like Michelle Bachmann here.
I like her.
Hello?
They're trying to get somebody.
No?
Yeah.
It was fine when you were speaking.
I'm glad of that. Hello? So Bachmann was denounced for calling for an investigation of the Brotherhood infiltrators in the U.S. government. However,
We're trying to get you another mic.
Thank you.
Battery's bad.
Is this big now?
Yes.
That's good.
There was an Egyptian newspaper in December of 2012. She called for the investigation in the summer of 2012. In December 2012, an Egyptian newspaper boasted about the Muslim Brotherhood infiltrators in the U.S. government and said that they had turned the U.S. government around from being the foremost enemy of Islam to being the foremost proponent of the Islamic agenda worldwide. And they named many of the same people that Bachman had named as being the infiltrators. Muhammad Ali Biari is my favorite. I met him. Muhammad Ali Biari is from Texas. And I was speaking in Dallas about 10 years ago, and Muhammad Ali Biari came. He wanted to play the victim and hear the great Islamophobe speak and whine about how I was victimizing poor innocent Muslims. And we had words after the talk. And in the course of our conversation, I asked him about why he would work with the Council on American Islamic Relations when they had ties to Hamas. And he said, I don't know anything about Hamas. If you want to know about Hamas, I'll give you Khalid Mashal's email address. And you can ask him directly. Khalid Mashal being the head of Hamas. Do you have the head of Hamas's email address? I don't either. Muhammad Ali Biari, the great moderate Muslim, he has it. Not only that, but Muhammad Ali Biari spoke a few years back at a conference in Dallas, a tribute to the great Islamic visionary, the Ayatollah Khomeini. Now, this guy is on the Department of Homeland Security Advisory Council. He was characterized in the press as the leading moderate Muslim in the United States. And he went to speak at a conference honoring the Ayatollah Khomeini, who, as far as I know, is not all that moderate.
Not really.
And I asked him about that too, in Dallas that day. And he said, I didn't know what that conference was all about. They didn't tell me it was a conference honoring Khomeini. I said, well, did you show up and speak? Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. If I came to a meeting and I didn't know what the meeting was all about, and I get there and everybody's wearing Klan robes, and I think, I'll just speak anyway. Do you think that Muhammad Ali Biari would let me off the hook? Do you think he should?
No.
So there you have it. Obviously, this guy is not in the least a moderate. And yet, he is on the Homeland Security Advisory Council. And he's just one of several in influential positions. And so if you look at, and I outline it actually in the book, the Obama administration's foreign policy, it has been completely and consistently, without any deviation whatsoever, in line with the Muslim Brotherhood agenda and supporting pro-Sharia Islamic supremacist regimes. So you got to think, well, these guys, they're doing their work well. But why is it happening? Well, Barack Obama obviously is sympathetic to the Brotherhood. Whether he's a secret Muslim or not, I'm not interested in speculating. I don't know. He doesn't answer my calls. He doesn't return my emails, nothing. But everything he has done has been in line with the Brotherhood agenda. He clearly thinks, for whatever reason, that Islamic law in a society is a good thing and to be encouraged. Yes, sir.
This is in regards to the First Amendment, freedom of speech, how it's being murdered. How much longer do you think I have? Because I refuse to stop speaking about Islam. How long do you think it'll be before I go to jail?
I think that's a question. Can I try this now? This is working?
Okay.
Whoa. Anyway, this is a very important question. How long is the First Amendment going to last? How long is it going to be before freedom fighters go to jail? I don't want to be hysterical, but I think that that is a possibility that could happen sooner than most of us think. And the reason is that, you know, so many people are complacent about the First Amendment. And they think, Well, you know, when I speak to them about the war on free speech and the attempt to shut down any criticism of jihad and rule it out of bounds, rule it illegal. And they say, well, don't worry about that, we have the First Amendment. As if the First Amendment is going to jump off the page and defend itself from attack. The First Amendment is only going to last as long as it has willing defenders. And in the White House, there are many people who are on record, including Kagan and Sotomayor on the Supreme Court, who have spoken about the need for various restrictions on speech. And remember Hillary Clinton saying to Tyrone Woods' father, Tyrone Woods being one of the people, the Navy SEAL killed at Benghazi. And the Obama administration, now we know they were completely lying about it all along. But they blamed that on the video of Muhammad. Blamed the Benghazi jihad attack on the video of Muhammad. And what did Hillary Clinton say to Tyrone Woods' father? We're going to have that filmmaker arrested.
Yeah.
And they did.
They did.
The filmmaker, he had... You got something? Yes? Oh, he's got to dismantle it. It's got an evil spirit in it, he's going to cast it out. Hello? Oh, yes. Good evening. So anyway, where were we?
Hillary Clinton.
Hillary Clinton. The guy had passed. The guy, apparently, I don't know him, but he apparently has a criminal record, and he was on probation. And so part of the terms of his probation were that he would not go on the internet. And so they said, well, you must have gone on the internet, you uploaded that video. And so they arrested him, they put him in jail. He was in jail for months. In the first place, how did they know he uploaded it? Maybe somebody else did for him. But in the second place, arrested and put in jail for months and months for uploading a video? Look, I ask you, this is Southern California, and I'm not from Southern California, but I have kind of an idea that probably if you went out into some of the areas of Los Angeles, you would probably be able to walk down the street for about 7 minutes and find 10 probation violators more serious than that guy. It seems to me to be not just likely, but certain that he was singled out for this violation, essentially this violation of Islamic blasphemy laws. And the part of, see, the ominous thing about the Benghazi attack and the Benghazi cover-up that very few people remark upon is precisely that the Obama administration chose to blame the First Amendment for it. They chose to blame our freedom of speech for it. They chose to pick out this video that nobody ever seen or heard of, that had 17 views on YouTube before this happened, and say it was all because of this. In other words, if we just shut up, and we don't say anything that bothers Muslims, then they won't kill us. And so if we surrender, everything will be okay. And that's the ominous thing about it. That he was a political prisoner for the freedom of speech. And that's very, very dangerous. Yes, sir?
You know, all these things are in open. Muslim Brotherhood, how they're doing it. But how many, the sleeper cells estimated, you know, there are. If they all combine, we are in big trouble.
Yes, is this working? Yes?
It is. It's lower.
It is working? Sleeper cells. There are sleeper cells. The thing about sleeper cells is none of us know where they are. They're sleeping. The sleeper cells, however, are real. In my book, in 2008, Stealth Jihad, any self-respecting bookstore should have it, Stealth Jihad. I have information from the FBI, which was not as bad as it is now. And there was an FBI agent who said that they were tracking Hezbollah sleeper cells in the U.S. and that they had communications from some of them saying that they were not going to attack anything in the U.S. right now. They were getting what they wanted very well without attacks. And so an attack would just be a tactical setback. It would just get them a lot of police and FBI looking at them. They could get more done without attacks. And how have they done it? By demonizing any counter-jihad effort. Yes, ma'am?
Yes, I've seen articles about Obama's brother Malik, who I believe lives in Kenya, and then he was granted within a few weeks from Lois Lerner of the IRS, a 501c3, and so he gets all kinds of money that he gives to the Muslim Brotherhood who are killing Christians all over the world. And Jerome Corsi wrote about this on WorldNet Daily. So we could say that the administration is funding the murder of Christians all over the world, and why doesn't anybody know about this?
Well, everybody doesn't know about this because most people don't read Jerome Corsi. No, don't disrespect to him. But I mean, it's not in the New York Times. It's not on CNN. And so most people have no idea. And it's even worse than that. Malik Obama is the head of the Barack H. Obama Foundation, named for the president. And it is a 501c3 organization that was rushed through. You know, Pamela Geller and I started the American Freedom Defense Initiative, and we applied for a 501c3 status, and about a year and a half later, we did get it. Maybe even longer. But it took a very long time to get. Malik Obama got his, as you say, in a matter of weeks. And you know what the Barack H. Obama Foundation does? They build mosques. They build mosques in Africa. And in those mosques, they teach the same things they teach in mosques everywhere. It's not like that in the Obama mosques, they have some different Quran that says give the unbelievers a hug instead of kill the unbelievers. Wafa.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As you might know, I am originally from Syria and proud to be American. But for me as a Syrian, I couldn't comprehend or even accept the fact that I saw Mr. John McCain shaking hands with Islamic groups in Syria and calling them heroes. I couldn't take it. It was a very shocking turning point of my life, and it was as shocking as when I discovered Islam was fake religion. So would you please comment in a way that might make me feel a little better?
I wish I could make you feel better. Unfortunately, there's nothing good to say about that. And the only thing that I can offer you is the truth. And I do believe, however, ultimately, that the truth will out and will win, and that even as bad as it is, we have to understand where we are first before we can get to where we want to go, you know, just like reading a map. And so the first thing we have to understand is a lot of people come up to me all the time and they say, well, you know, in 2016, maybe we'll get a good president in there and all this will turn around. Well, it's not going to happen. Because the Republicans are almost as clueless and compromised as the Democrats are. And John McCain going there and standing with these Al-Qaeda people and saying they were great heroes is just evidence, only one piece of evidence, of how clueless the Republicans are. The fact is that George W. Bush is responsible for this to a great degree, but also Grover Norquist, the head of Americans for Tax Reform, who is the most influential and powerful power broker in the Republican Party. You can't really run for national office in the Republican Party without his blessing. And he won't give his blessing to anybody who is opposed to jihad terror. He has received money from Abdurrahman al-Amoudi, who is now in prison for fundraising for Al-Qaeda. He has supported various Muslim Brotherhood operatives and candidates and so on. And the thing is that what McCain and George W. Bush and the establishment Republicans generally think is that anybody who's opposed to the obvious jihad terrorists are moderates. And so McCain, he sees these groups that he's standing with fighting against other jihad terrorists, and he thinks, oh, they're the moderates, they're the good guys. He doesn't know anything about Islam. He's never cracked open a Quran. He has no idea what Islam teaches. And so he thinks, well, this tiny minority of extremists, they're the bad guys. And these people are fighting them, they're the good guys. And they must teach peace and justice and harmony. This is the problem, that there is this pervasive, willful ignorance on both sides of the aisle. The fact that the Free Syrian Army is fighting the al-Nusra Front in Syria does not mean the Free Syrian Army is moderates. The Free Syrian Army goes into Christian areas in Syria and destroys the churches and terrorizes the Christians and kills people and drives them out. They're not moderates. But they're fighting Al-Qaeda, they must be. See, this is the kind of superficial analysis and fantasy-based policymaking that prevails in Washington. What we need is a complete change in the political culture.
Yes.
And what we must do is no longer tolerate these candidates who will not give it to us and who will not speak out for the truth about these issues. And I hope that the Republican Party will go the way of the Whigs at this point and just disintegrate such that a group can arise that's like the Republicans arose in the 1850s to counter slavery and to take a strong stand against slavery instead of the mealy-mouthed weakness of the Whigs and the Democrats at the time. What we need is a party that will actually stand up for American national interests and national security and speak honestly about jihad terror. And I'm hoping that with the confusion of the Republican Party, that its disintegration will be imminent, such that we can bring about that new group.
I hope so.
On several talk shows on television, there have been people who've said that Sharia law is already respected in 24 states. I find that hard to believe, and I want to know what your opinion is. Is that a total bogus claim?
It's not totally a bogus claim, but it's mostly a bogus claim. It's not that Sharia law is respected in 24 states. It's actually 23 states that have had rulings in courts that have made reference to Sharia in a positive way. And so that is the reason why there are so many anti-Sharia initiatives. Because judges are making reference to Sharia in their rulings. The most notorious case was actually one that was overturned, but it's still a disquieting incident to have happened. It was in New Jersey, where there was a case of spousal rape. And the judge decided not to charge the man because he was a Muslim. And in Islam, there is no right for a woman to refuse her husband under any circumstances ever. And so he said, well, the guy just didn't know what he was doing was wrong. So he didn't charge him. Well, he didn't know what he was doing was wrong under Sharia. But in American law, that's still illegal. So that was overturned. But that's the kind of thing. We're talking about isolated decisions and incidents, most of them having to do with inheritance procedures. The Quran says that a son will inherit twice as much as a daughter, and so on, things like that, where judges have ruled that the will can be probated according to Sharia and so on. These things are bad precedents, because Sharia is all a unit. You can't really separate out marriage law or inheritance law or whatever else that seems benign, and isn't usually, but nonetheless seems benign, from jihad and supremacism and subjugation of infidels. And so it's something that should be opposed. But it's not as if 24 states have accepted Sharia or allowed for it or something like that. It's separate judges' rulings. Yes, sir?
I have a question concerning the news networks and the schizophrenic commentaries. For instance, Megyn Kelly had a great commentary on the issue of the honor diaries or the video being shown at the 9/11 memorial. But then they have guests on, like Joy Brighton, who authored a book, and I quote her, where she says that, and this has nothing to do with Islam, and this has nothing to do with religion. And then she had her on, and so did Glenn Beck. And so they do well on one point, and then they turn around and do something completely different that contradicts our dealing with Islam on a rational basis.
Yes.
How do you account for that? Who do we hold accountable to that, that's calling the shots on how they come?
Well, like I said, that there's bipartisan cluelessness. It also extends to the media and to Fox, which is supposed to be the alternative, to the ideological lockstep of the leftist media, of CNN and MSNBC and ABC and all the rest of them. Fox is supposed to be the alternative. But Fox really is pretty much almost just as clueless. They will talk about these issues, but they stop at a certain point. Glenn Beck, when he was on Fox years ago, he said, and I quote, "I have read the entire Quran and I can tell you that Islam is a religion of peace." And I would have said to him, Glenn, you have to read with your eyes open. But anyway, it's the same thing with Joy Brightman and Megyn Kelly. the idea that Sharia has nothing to do with Islam is like saying the Ten Commandments have nothing to do with Christianity or Judaism. It's like saying the resurrection of Christ has nothing to do with Christianity. Sharia is Islamic law that is derived from the Quran and the Sunnah. The Sunnah is the Hadith that are the traditions of what Muhammad said and did, and rulings that are extrapolated from them. It is considered to be the law of Allah. Rulings that are settled and are agreed upon by ijma, consensus, among all the schools of jurisprudence. There is no appeal from them. There is no reforming them or changing them. They're considered to be the law of Allah, as much as Christians believe the Ten Commandments are the law of God. So to say that Sharia has nothing to do with Islam, it's ridiculous. But that way, they preserve the idea, which is above all the thing that must be preserved, that they are not Islamophobic, that they're not attacking Islam, that they have accepted. Fox has wholly internalized the idea that it's racist and bigoted and Islamophobic and hateful to talk about how jihad terrorists use the texts and teachings of Islam to justify violence and supremacism. So they will talk about the violence and supremacism more than CNN will, but they won't say how it comes from Islam and is justified by Islam. Now, this is another thing where we just have to demand better and call upon them to be more responsible in their reporting. And you can say, well, sure, but, okay, I could, send a tweet to Megyn Kelly and she's not going to care. Sure, but if 100,000 people do, she will care. And we have to start it.
Right.
Yes, sir.
I think it was 2 summers ago, the United States Congress had an open hearing on Islam in America, conducted by Representative King, I believe. And he had speakers on there, educated people, and it came out that Islam is not compatible with the United States Constitution. No. Where did this was too so? You think they'd get a hearing like this, that kind of an audience, and it went nowhere.
Yeah, it went nowhere for several reasons. One is Congressman King, that he did a great thing with that hearing. And so, in the first place, I have to say that before I start knocking. Sorry. I'm here to tell you the truth, even if it's inconvenient to even all of us here. The thing that Peter King did in the first place was he said that he was talking about radical Islam. It wasn't as if he was going to call people like Robert Spencer to speak. And I thought, wow, Peter King's heard of it. This is great. Jesse Jackson and Peter King. The thing about it is that it wasn't personal. It wasn't about me. The point was, what he was saying was, we're not going to get into Islamic doctrine here. We're not going to get into, see, the idea that the hearings established that Islam is incompatible with the U.S. Constitution. I'm sorry to say that there was nothing like that discussed. And there was no such conclusion reached. They did talk about terror activity among U.S. Muslims and uncovered a good bit of damaging information that is good. I'm glad that that happened. But here again, King retreated from discussing why these things are happening. See, it's not like I just hate Islam that I want these things discussed. I don't hate nothing. The thing is that we have to understand why these things are happening if we're going to stop them. And so if King really wanted to stop jihad terror plotting in the U.S., he would have to go to how it germinates. And it comes from these Islamic teachings. There was a fellow in North Carolina, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, my alma mater, Mohammad Reza Tahiri Azhar. And Mohammad Reza Tahiri Azhar was a student there. It's a few years back. He was not connected with Al-Qaeda. He was not connected with any jihad terror group. He wasn't even involved in any Muslim group. But he was a Muslim. And so he started to read the Quran. You know, in Islam, you've got to read the Quran in Arabic. It's not the Quran otherwise, unless it's in Arabic. Mohammad Reza Tahiri Azhar was Iranian. He did not know Arabic. Most Muslims don't know Arabic. Most Muslims are not Arabs. Most of them recite the Quran. They're reciting syllables they memorized. They have no idea what it means. I had a Pakistani Muslim tell me a few years back, and this is not a joke, he was quite serious. He said, I have memorized almost all the Quran, and I'm very proud of my religion, and one day I intend to get one of those
translations and find out what it means. So Muhammad Reza Tahiri Azhar got one of those translations and found out what it meant. And he realized that he had to wage jihad against the infidels. So he rented an SUV and he drove it onto the campus of the University of North Carolina trying to run down as many students as he could. He didn't end up killing anybody. He injured 9 students before he was stopped. But then he wrote letters to the student newspaper there explaining with copious Quran quotes all about why he had done it and why it was a good thing to do. Now, this incident was completely buried, but I bring it up because it's just the kind of thing that Peter King's hearings were not equipped to deal with. Because he was not going to get into why people are, there's a lot of talk about what radicalizes Muslims. Because obviously a lot of Muslims are not radical, they're just going about their lives. So what makes some of them start killing us? Well, you hear a lot about, well, they get radicalized on the internet. Well, okay, but they ain't going to porn sites to get radicalized on the internet. What are they getting radicalized on the internet by?
The Quran.
Presentations of the Quran. Presentations of the Quran's violent verses and of Muhammad's teachings to wage war against the infidels. But then we can't go there. The king did not go there. And until we go there, we're not going to be able to do anything effective to stop. Yes, ma'am?
Would you comment on Ted Cruz, please?
Well, he seems like a likable guy. As far as I know, he's never said anything about this issue. If there is something he said about this issue, I've missed it. So I'm sorry. There's a lot of hope in people like Ted Cruz because people think that they represent a wing of the party that will be more realistic about these issues. I no longer have that hope because of Grover Norquist and because of the way the Republican Party has gone. But maybe Ted Cruz will surprise me. I hope he will or somebody will. Yes, sir.
Comment on Keith Ellison. How in the world did Minnesota elect a Muslim congressman?
Well, Minnesota's always been pretty far to the left. You can go back decades, and there was the Farmer Labor Party, which was essentially a socialist party, and Hubert Humphrey, who was a very good man in many ways, but he was a socialist who wanted to have socialized medicine long before Barack Obama. And Minneapolis has always been a leftist place, and so you have a black Muslim candidate for Congress. It's irresistible to leftists. They think, well, it would be racist to oppose him, and it will show how multicultural we are if we have this cool black Muslim congressman. And the thing about Keith Ellison is he actually is one of the main people who ruined the King hearings, because the mainstream media coverage of the King hearings became all about how he busted out crying, remember? Yeah. He was weeping just copiously at the hearings. Why was he weeping? He was reading a statement, a story about a Muslim who was a fireman in New York. And on September 11th, 2000, World Trade Center, and he was killed there. And he was missing. It wasn't known where he was. And because he was a Muslim, said Keith Ellison, he was suspected as being involved in the attacks because he disappeared after them. And only when his remains were found was it shown that he was actually there trying to save people's lives. Now, the thing about that is that it's almost wholly false. There was a Muslim who was a fireman who was killed at 9/11 at the World Trade Center. They just named a street after him in New York City. But he was never suspected as being involved in the attacks. There is no evidence whatsoever that the racist, Islamophobic mainstream media ever said that this guy disappeared and we think he might have been involved. No evidence whatsoever. And that is a wholly concocted myth designed to advance the idea that Muslims are victims in the United States and ought not to be subjected to scrutiny for terrorist activities. And Ellison's crying performance was the whole substance of the coverage of the King hearings in the mainstream media. So that most people just thought, well, this Islamophobic congressman, this racist congressman tried to demonize Muslims, and this Muslim congressman got all upset and really showed him up. And that's what it was all about. His theatrics were better than King's. And so much of this with the media these days is theatrics. But listen, Keith Ellison, one last thing about him. He's Brotherhood, Muslim Brotherhood congressman.
There's no exaggeration there. Keith Ellison took $13,500 from the Muslim American Society to go on the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. They financed his Hajj. The Muslim American Society is a Muslim Brotherhood organization. It is universally acknowledged that the Muslim American Society is actually the primary Muslim Brotherhood group in the United States. Imagine if there were a congressman who took $13,500 to take a trip financed from the KKK. Do you think nobody would care? But nobody cares that Keith Ellison took this money from the Brotherhood. Now, that's just an indication of how base and degenerate our political culture has become. The Republicans ought to have been all over that issue. And yet they're cowed, they're afraid, because if they say, you know, Keith Ellison, he's taking money from the Muslim Brotherhood, then the Democrats will say, oh, look at this racist attack on our black congressman. And then they say, oh, sorry, sir, we'll shut up about it. And that's why we're in the fix we're in. Yes, ma'am.
I know you and Pamela Geller were very much involved in the mosque near Ground Zero. As a family member of 9/11, I lost my son in it. I've been watching this forever. And I've heard now that the guy that owns the what is it, something Park?
It's the street is Park Place. And
Park Place, yeah.
The Burlington Coat Factory is
I
on
understand
that
they're going to demolish the building and then he's going to build a museum.
Yes, this is the latest plan.
What's happening with that?
Well, the Sharif El-Gamal is a developer, a real estate developer in New York City, and he was the one who was going to build the Ground Zero Mosque. And then, yeah, we did stop the Ground Zero Mosque. They were actually going to break ground on September 11th, 2011, 10-year anniversary. They were going to break ground for this 16-story mosque at the site of the Burlington Coat Factory on Park Place in New York City. Now you have to understand, the Burlington Coat Factory is right around the corner from the World Trade Center. And on 9/11, when the jet airplane, one of the planes hit the towers, the engine of the plane flew out and hit the roof of the Burlington Coat Factory building, crashed through the roof, and severely damaged the building. The building was condemned and was vacant until a Muslim group bought it and started having prayers there. They wanted to tear down the ruined building and build the 16-story mosque. And that was obviously going to be a triumphal mosque, just like the mosque on the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock, and the Hagia Sophia, which was once a great cathedral and was then turned into a mosque in Istanbul, and the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, which was once the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, and so on. They were going to make it into a triumphal mosque on the site of the jihad attack. We stopped them. 70% of the American people were against them. We held 3 big rallies at Ground Zero, the second of which on September 11th, 2010, we had 20,000, 30,000 people there. And then Keith Olbermann said the next day, 500 angry Islamophobes gathered at Ground Zero. But we got the pictures. The crowd was amazing. I never saw so many people in one place. But anyway, they dropped it. They stopped plans. Yeah. They declared victory and got out, actually, like Nixon in Vietnam. They said, well, we built it. It's there. And they meant the little mosque that they have in the Burlington Coat Factory building. And actually, people fell for this, of course. The New York Times was calling me and saying, well, what do you think now that the Ground Zero Mosque is there? So that's not what we were fighting. We don't care if there are Muslims praying there in the ruined building. We didn't want the 16-story triumphal mosque built. But anyway, now what they did, what he's done, Sharif El-Gamal, is he's now announced that he's going to build a 3-story Museum of Islam there. And the thing is, it will also be a mosque. I actually ran into him. I was in New York City, minding my own business, walking down the street, and this guy saying, Mr. Spencer, Mr. Spencer! And so I thought, yikes. No reporter? Yikes. I turned around and it was Sharif El-Gamal, and he wanted to chat. We had a really interesting talk, and he told me, I'm going to build it. I'm still going to build it. And so I'm sure he's going to try, and I'm sure that we're going to be there. And we're going to keep him from doing it. Yeah.
Well,
Oh, one last thing though, 1 second about Sharif. That Museum of Islam, that's just as much of an abomination as a triumphal mosque. Is there a museum to Shinto emperor worship at Pearl Harbor? About the glories of Shinto civilization? No, of course there isn't. And it would be an insult to have it there. And it would be an insult to have this there. You can sing the glories of Islam somewhere else. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think that Holland and Belgium and France are going to survive what's happening there? Are they doing anything to pull out?
As the great philosopher Yogi Berra once said, it ain't over till it's over. And I never give up hope. I think the situation is very dire for all of us, and especially Europe. But even if they take over, it ain't over. Even if an Islamic state were declared in France, it ain't over. Because I am confident that there are millions, not hundreds or thousands, but millions of people all over Europe who are not going to want to live under Sharia. Is it going to be ugly? Yes. Is it going to be difficult? Yes. Is it going to be bloody? Probably. I hope not, but probably. But I never give up hope. And I think that as long as there are free people anywhere, we still got a chance. You know, the truth is very powerful. I can tell you that the Council on American Islamic Relations, they write about me and Pamela Geller and other people so often. It is clear that they're desperately afraid of us. And who are we? We don't have anything. They've got the government, they've got the politicians in their pocket like so many nickels. They've got the media, they say jump, and the New York Times says, how high, sir? How high, Sahib? We got nothing. And yet they're so afraid of us. Why? Because we tell the truth. That's all. And that's why we'll win. Thank you very much.